Hello guys, Beastie here. I am back with another video, and today, like the title says, we're doing Gold to Grandmaster series. So here we are, you're finally gold. This is the point in your StarCraft II journey where you should know every single unit in the game and what it can do. Not necessarily how to use all the units, just knowing what every unit in the game is capable of and how you should try and approach those units when you face them in your latter games. Now, the first thing we'll be talking about in this video is the build order. My suggestion is to find one build order or one playstyle and try to use it for all three matchups. In my opinion, build order is not a priority for you right now, and you should be focusing on all the other things we've discussed previously and also the things we'll be discussing in this video, as well as trying to improve your mechanics overall. There's some exceptions to this rule. For example, Protoss versus Protoss has very specific builds, as well as Zerg versus Zerg. But like I said, if not to use exactly same build orders, try to use somewhat similar playstyles in all three matchups. For example, you would be focusing on one unit composition all three matchups, rather than using, mutas in one matchups, lurkers in another one, and then swarm host in the third one, or something like that. This is the easiest to do for Terran as a race, because you can do Reaper expand in every matchup, and you can pretty much transition into barracks, factory, starport in all of them, and kind of do Marine tank medevac or Marine tank Viking unit compositions. Just kind of practice that while you work on all the other things. But if you're Protoss or Zerg, again, find similar playstyles and try to use as close similar openings in all three matchups in order to allow yourself to not spend your time learning those rather than learning things that are kind of a priority. Either way, try and keep it simple for now. If you're interested in some build orders guides, you can always check out my other video guides where I explain and discuss in depth how to execute certain strategies. As well, there's a bunch of guides and just a bunch of tutorials, whether on YouTube or on forums, where you can kind of check those things out and get more information on how to execute the strategies. A bunch of beginner guides you can use and kind of help yourself get started at the same time. Now let's talk about the Minimap. Minimap is an extremely important tool in StarCraft II that you should try and use more and more the higher you advance in your leagues. It's extremely useful to spot drops, run-bys, or attacks from your opponent. You won't really get dropped at multiple places at the same time in Gold League, but I think this is a very good time to start paying attention more and more to your minimap and just kind of get used to doing that in the long run. You need to try and build a habit of checking the minimap every time you aren't doing anything that requires your full attention on the middle of your screen or anywhere on your screen except the minimap. Of course, there are certain situations where you have to keep your eyes on the screen, and those are if you're microing in a big battle, if you're placing your buildings, if you're all-inning or defending an all-in, you will prioritize those things first. Any other time, you should always take a glance in your minimap and try to spot for incoming drops, harassments from your opponent, or just the main attacks. Try and make this a rule for yourself. If I don't look in the middle of the screen, always check what's happening on the minimap. Now, this is something that at the beginning, it might be a little bit hard and you might need to actively force yourself to do it, but the more games you play, the more experience you have, you will kind of get used to it and it become just a part of your macro mechanic route, just muscle memory to always do it, and it will greatly improve your gameplay in the long run. Start expanding your army composition more and more and just add units you might not have used before. There are no units in StarCraft II that are not used at all, so having experience or general idea on how to use all the units from your race will be very good for you in the long run. We're not trying to completely change your playstyle, just get you slowly comfortable with trying out new units, new unit compositions, and playstyles. Maybe it gives you more ideas on how you want to play and what you would want your unit composition to look like in the future. If you're a Terran player that loves using Marines, siege tanks, and medevacs, try opening Cloak Banshee against all three races before transitioning into your main unit compositions. Maybe mix in a Cyclone or two for early game defense as well. If you're a Protoss player, try opening Oracles or Dark Templars and harass your opponent worker line before transitioning to your main unit composition that you're already used to. If you're a Zerg player, perhaps try different unit compositions. If your main one was just massing roaches in all three matchups, try playing some Zergling, Baneling, Hydra. Again, trying to get comfortable with your other units, and play styles and kind of seeing what you like and what you prefer. Another thing you can try to do in the mid game, try using infestors and swarm hosts. Again, just trying out different units and getting used to all the units you can potentially build in your games. My advice is to not mess around with tier 3 units yet. Units like carriers, battlecruisers, Tempest, Broodlords, and Vipers. Those units can be great in certain situations in the game, but they're much different from all the other units in your arsenal, and using them at this point might make things too complicated from where we are right now. Actually using those units is not complicated. Most of those units are a move except for the spellcasters. The real problem is transitioning to them successfully and actually surviving. It might leave you too vulnerable to the early game attacks. I talked earlier about what unit types exist and how they work. Before starting your next ladder session, try spending a little bit more time thinking what unit compositions and strategies you normally lose to, and with this new acquired knowledge, try to counter those things you lose against the most. I'm not saying never ever build tier 3 units, of course. Sometimes games just end up being 20, 30, 40 minute games. Build tier 3 units, but for now, don't have your strategy rely on going towards tier 3 units, but rather experiment in the early and mid game. Now let's talk about something super important, which is scouting in StarCraft II. We won't go into super detailed guide about scouting in Gold to Grandmaster part of this series. Again, we're keeping it nice and simple for now. In the future, we'll be discussing this more in depth. What I want to tell you guys is try to scout as much as possible with your overlords if you're a Zerg player. Having your first overlord go across the map always, no matter what the matchup is. Just trying to see if your opponent expanded or not, and have your second overlord always scout for proxy buildings like barracks, gateways, or even cannon rushes if you see the enemy probe kind of sneaking around and trying to go behind your natural mineral lines. Now, if you're a Protoss player, you should always scout after you place your first pylon, in my opinion. I think that's the safest way to do it. It will give you enough time to go across the map and see if the Zerg is maybe doing a pull first, or if the Terran is missing his barracks in his main base, so you can kind of properly react. You can also scout after you've placed your first gateway. That requires a little bit more experience. It's a little bit delayed. It's not a huge difference. If you are unsure, if you're losing to a lot of cheeses, my advice is to just scout after the first pylon is placed. Go across the map and see if your opponent is expanding, proxying, or just playing a normal game so you can accordingly react to it. If you're a Terran player, my suggestion is to send an SCV across the map at 17 supply, no matter what matchup you're playing, which you can then follow up with your Reaper Scout. And the main thing you will be looking for, no matter what race you play against, with your Worker or your Overlord, is if your opponent expanded or not. If you see that your opponent hasn't expanded, for example, again, this doesn't matter if you're Terran, Protoss, or Zerg. If you see that your opponent hasn't expanded and has a double gas mining in the main base, that can obviously mean trouble. This varies from matchup to matchup, but the general rule, if the opponent is for sure not expanding and he's still in one base mining double gas, there is possible either aggression or just some kind of tech, whether it's Stargate, Dark Templars, maybe even a siege tank push from one base or something like that. This is the first thing you should be looking for, if the opponent is expanding or not, and also if his production buildings are in his main base or if they're perhaps proxy. Of course, this is a very simplified explanation, but in general, that's what you'll be looking for when scouting with your first Worker, and then after that, whenever you do your follow-up scout with your Reaper, with your Adept, with your Overlord trying to suicide it into the main base, try to scout for more information. That's basically your job of the first Worker to then your follow-up scout as well, and obviously checking for what kind of tech the opponent has. You can always, by the way, rescout his natural and check if he maybe expanded a little bit later. There are some builds depending on the matchup where the opponent will go for the expand, but it will just be a little later expand, and this is why scouting is so important. Even when you do the first scout, try to do a little follow-up scout right after that and just kind of confirm, okay, he's still on one base, I need to play defensive, there's no reason for me to push out, and I just need to defend for now until I confirm that he's expanding, and that's kind of your turn to be maybe more aggressive on the map and start moving out. But if you don't see the base, then well, prepare to defend and all in. Assuming your opponent expanded, try to have, like I said, a follow-up scout a few minutes after your initial Worker scout. Again, no matter what race you play, you can always do that follow-up scout, whether that's the Adept, the Hallucinated Phoenix, Reaper, or again, like I said, suicide the Overlord and try to get more information and see what your tech buildings the opponent has, which will obviously give you more information to play with on what should I be preparing for. If you scout in, let's say you're Zerg player and you see Starport researching something, it's probably Cloak Banshee, or if you see Dark Shrine, you want to get some detection going so you make sure you don't die to the invisible units. Sometimes these kinds of units can seem very OP and very strong, but scouting is what is one of the most important things in StarCraft II, and the difference between scouting Dark Templars and then just walking in your base and killing your drones is a huge, and it will completely change the outcome of the game. So it's basically the difference between getting harassed a little bit with those DTs and you defending them successfully, or being unprepared and just losing a bunch of workers or even the game. Now, the last thing I want to mention, scouting is not just for cheeses. Scouting is also, like I mentioned previously, to see what kind of tech your opponent is going for. If you scout and you see a bunch of Stargates, right, you don't need to be worried about ground attack. Make sure to get anti-air units, make sure to maybe make a Spore Crawler missile turret. If you scout a Terran and you see a factory producing siege tanks, then you have to prepare for a siege tank type of push. You're gonna see, okay, Starport has no tech lab, I don't need to prepare stealth detection, I can just work on trying to defend what unit composition I'm seeing. Or if Terran is going for a 3 barracks build, again, no matter if you're Zerg, Terran, or Protoss, you can be like, okay, there's 3 barracks, no factory, so probably a frontal push. This is the area I need to secure. I don't need to worry about Banshees, I don't need to worry about Hellions, I don't need to worry about Liberators or any kind of really good siege positions. With Siege Tank, this will kind of give you more info on how to play. And my advice for you, the next time you play your games, try to look for these things, try to think about, okay, what can my opponent do based on what I've scouted, and you just try to eliminate the possibilities and the options that your opponent can do until you get to one of them, and then you just try to counter it, defend it, punish it if they're going super greedy, and that's pretty much it. Again, this is very oversimplified version of the scouting. Once we get into the higher, probably Diamond or Master, we'll be talking more about in-depth scouting. This is the part where we start learning about unit attributes, because that plays a huge part with actually dealing with different units and unit types. Units in StarCraft II are tagged with one or more attributes that determine bonus damage, effect targeting, and or can influence spells and abilities. If you guys are not sure what unit attributes are, when you select the unit, under their damage and their armor, you can see they're massive, if they're biological, mechanical, armored, and so on and so forth. So those are the unit attributes we are talking about. There are 2 types of armor in StarCraft II, light and armored. There's also 2 types of units, which are either biological or mechanical. There are also some special types, but we'll discuss those later on, and we're gonna focus on some of the ones that we just mentioned. But first, couple of things before we get started that I wanted to mention and make sure everyone is on the same page. So in StarCraft II, all units are either ground or air units. All units are either melee, ranged, or have no attack. All units in StarCraft II are either light or armored. The exception to this rule are Archons, Ghosts, Ravager, Banelings, Queens, and Cocoons, which are actually neither light nor armored. If you have some kind of unit dealing bonus damage to light or armored, these units will not get affected by either of those, but their other typings, their other unit attributes will make them vulnerable to certain types of things. And last but not least, all units are either biological or mechanical, like we mentioned earlier, and the exception to this rule, Archons and infested Terran eggs as well. They're neither biological or mechanical. And then we have an SCV and Hellbat, which are actually both biological and mechanical. And what that means is you can heal your Hellbats and SCVs with medevacs, but you can also repair them because they count as mechanical unit at the same time. Now what I want to do is discuss some of these unit typings and unit armors to quickly explain the specific things and rules that apply to them, whether it's for spell casting or ability casting, and how some of them interact with one another. So the first one we're going to be discussing is the light units that we mentioned previously. So light units are pretty well spread across all 3 races. They don't really have anything weird or special about them. Every race has a pretty equal amount of light units within their army. The units that have bonus damage versus light units in the game are Adepts, Phoenix, and Oracle from Protoss. Hellions, Hellbats, Ghosts, and Thors deal bonus damage versus light units, except Thors deal bonus damage against only light air units that are often used, for example, to deflect Mutalisks in TVZ. From Zerg units, the only unit that actually deals bonus damage to light units is the Baneling. There's no other unit in the Zerg arsenal that deals bonus to light, and Zerg is actually the only race that has the least amount of bonus damage typings against armored or light in the game compared to Terran or Protoss. The only upgrade in the game that gives some unit more damage versus light units is the Infernal Pre-Igniter for Hellions. It gives +5 damage for the Hellions and +12 if it's in the Hellbat mode. Now, armored units, the opposite of the light ones, just like the light units, are very well spread across all the races and are actually more represented in StarCraft II than the light units, which is something before I actually started making this video, I always figured that there's more light units in the game. Not the case. So units that deal bonus damage versus armored units are Stalker, Immortal, and Void Ray from Protoss, Marauder, Siege Tank, and Viking from the Terran race, and then from the Zerg race. The funny thing is, one of the units that deal bonus damage versus armored, well, it's not a unit, it's a building, is the Spinecrawler, which honestly before making this video I did not know. And then we also have Lurkers dealing bonus damage to the armored units. Those are the only two things from the Zerg race. Now, the only upgrade in the game that affects bonus damage versus specifically armored units is Terran's Cyclone Magfill Accelerator, making it deal extra 400 damage to armored units. As you can see so far, there aren't many units that deal bonus damage versus light or armored units. StarCraft II is not a game with hard counters where, you know, one unit just beats the other one straight up. Some units will have extra, bit of damage advantage over others, but at the end of the day, it's how you use your units and not how much damage those units can deal. The next thing we'll be discussing are the unit types, like we mentioned previously, biological and mechanical. Every single Zerg unit, including all their buildings, are biological. Meanwhile, Terran only has 6 biological units and Protoss only has 4 biological units. The only unit in the game that deals bonus damage versus specifically biological type is the Archon. This is why you see heavy Archon unit compositions in Protoss vs Zerg in the pro matches, but also why you see a lot of Archon play in Protoss vs Terran, because if Terran goes bio, Archons will be doing a lot of damage versus those, and you see a lot of Archons in Protoss vs Protoss due to the amount of Zealots that the opponents usually make. As far as spells and abilities go, Ghost Snipe is the only ability usable only versus biological unit and deals 170 damage to a unit, which you mostly see in Terran vs Zerg or Terran vs Protoss against High Templars in order to prevent the High Templars from casting storms. So even though you can snipe units that are light or armored, they need to be biological. If they're mechanical, snipe will simply not work at all. Another thing to note regarding abilities, Transfusion from Zerg's Queens can heal any Zerg unit in the game, as well as any Zerg building in the game as well. Because Zerg's units and buildings are biological, Queens can be used to heal them. Transfusion only works on Zerg buildings, Zerg units, and if you're playing a team game, you can transfuse your allies' Hatchery or your allies' Broodlord, but not Terran or Protoss units. On the other side, you have Medevac Healing Spell, also works only on biological units, except you cannot heal Zerg's buildings with them, but you can heal both Protoss and Zerg units from your allies. So if you have Zealots that are hurt, or if you have Zerglings, the Medevac will heal them, but the Medevacs cannot heal buildings, even though they are biological. Now, on the opposite side of the biological units, we have mechanical units. Zerg as a race has actually 0 mechanical units, considering we just said they're all biological. Now, both Protoss and Terran have pretty much equal number of mechanical units between the two races. The only units in the game dealing bonus damage versus mechanical units are the Vikings in ground mode, and this is something that's been added, I think, in Legacy of the Void. Historically, that was the only unit in the game that deals bonus damage versus specifically mechanical units. Just like biological units can be healed, on the other side we have mechanical units that can be repaired by SCVs and mules. They can repair buildings that are damaged as well as repair mechanical units in the game. Because Zerg's units and buildings as a race are biological, you cannot help your Zerg ally if you're playing a team game and you guys are playing Terran and Zerg. You cannot repair his buildings or units, but on the other hand, if you have your ally being Terran or even Protoss, you can actually repair their buildings and their units. A lot of people actually don't know this, but if you're playing a team game, you can repair your Protoss's ally probes, stalkers, sentries, immortals, colossus, observer, as well as including whole Protoss fleet, because those units are all mechanical units. You will not be able to repair their health, but you can actually repair their shields because they are the ones that count as mechanical, and the health counts as biological part of the Protoss units. So next time you see your Protoss buddy in low health, help them out. Like we mentioned previously, unlike biological units, mechanical units cannot be targeted by the Ghost Snipe ability. The only spell usable on specifically mechanical units is the Interference Matrix from the Raven. It can be casted on both mechanical and psionic units. For those who don't know, Interference Matrix disables the units for 7.9 seconds, making it unable to attack or use its abilities, and it also reveals cloaked units. So we just covered the more common ones, the light and armored, biological, mechanical, and now we're about to cover the special type units in StarCraft II. These units are not as common, but they're equally important to know about. The first one we'll be discussing is the Psionic. Because there are not many Psionic units in the game, I'll just go ahead and name all of them. So from the Protoss, we have units that are Psionic are Sentries, High Templars, Dark Templars, Archons, War Prism, Oracle, and Mothership. The only Terran units in the game that are psionic are ghosts, and every single Zerg spellcaster unit is actually a psionic unit. So queens, infestors, and vipers are all counting as a psionic unit. The only spell usable on psionic units specifically is, like previously mentioned, the Interference Matrix from the Raven. Next special type we'll be discussing is the Massive. Massive units in StarCraft II are usually tier 3 units that are very big, very clunky, very expensive, but also very, very powerful. Those units are Thors, Battle Cruisers, Ultralisk, Broodlords, Broodlord Cocoons, Archons, Colossus, Carriers, Tempests, and Mothership. Now, units dealing bonus damage to massive units in the game are Tempests, but only versus air units, not versus ground, and Zergs, Corruptors that also deal bonus damage, obviously against air units because they cannot shoot ground. Massive units, one thing to know about them is they cannot be slowed. So for example, if you have Marauders with concussive shells, you cannot slow down Archons or Ultralisks or Thors, and also they cannot be lifted by Phoenix's Graviton Beam. So if you ever wondered why you cannot lift Archons or Ultras, now you know why, because the units are massive. And the last thing I want to mention about massive units is they actually can walk through force fields, and once they do, they break the force fields and the force field actually disappears from the game. And at the same time, if you try to cast force field on top of those massive units, nothing will happen. The force field will just instantly be removed. Now, the next special type we'll be talking about is the structure type. This one is a bit obvious because every single building in StarCraft II has a structure typing added to it, no matter if you're Terran, Zerg, or Protoss. But I wanted to talk about a couple of different things that you might not have known about. The first thing is the Stasis Trap from the Oracle counts as a structure at the same time, and also Terran's Raven auto turret ability also counts as structure and can be, both of them can be repaired at the same time, even though they have a limited duration and they're actually abilities in the game. The only unit in the game that deals bonus damage specifically to buildings is the Baneling, and on top of my head I think it is 80 damage per Baneling to a building. Nuke from the Ghost is actually the only ability that deals extra damage versus buildings in StarCraft II. There's no other ability in the game that you can cast or spell that you can use that does bonus extra damage versus the structure type. Two more abilities that are usable only on buildings in the game are Contaminate from the Overseer, preventing destruction from training units or continuing research, and Caustic Spray from the Corruptor, aka, as everyone knows it, the peeing ability that channels the damage onto the building. Caustic Spray cannot be used on units, it's just usable on structure types. For those that maybe have not seen this, you can actually EMP buildings if buildings have energy. So for example, if you're a Terran and you have a bunch of ghosts, you can EMP orbital commands, or you can EMP Nexus or shield batteries to drain their energy, even though they're buildings and not units. And the last special unit we'll be talking about, special attribute, is the Detector attribute, and that's basically your stealth detection in the game, so you can see units and attack them, and those are Dark Templars, Banshees, and burrowed units from the Zerg, or Stasis Trap because they're also invisible, even though it counts as a building. Now, Detector units in StarCraft II are Observers, Ravens, and Overseers from each race, and Detector buildings that are in the game, which are Photon Cannons, Spore Crawlers, and Missile Turrets, and of of course, the last one is the orbital command that can cast scanner sweep in order to reveal those units. The abilities regarding special detector types that can help you see them are Oracle's Revelation, which you can cast if you see that shimmer, that blur, and it will reveal the unit, making it possible for you to attack it. Ghost's EMP, again, this is something that not many people know, but if you see that little shimmer, you can use Ghost's EMP and it will actually reveal a unit for a couple of seconds, allowing you to kill it. And then the last one from the Zerg, we have Infestor's Fungal Growth ability. Not only it will deal damage to the stealthed unit, but it will also reveal it for the duration of the fungal growth, allowing you to quickly deal with it. The last thing I wanted to mention is a little fun fact about all these unit typings. The only unit in the game that has 4 unit typings at the same time is the Mothership. Mothership is armored unit, it's massive, psionic, and mechanical all at the same time. This was a lot of info to take in, but this is something that I felt like was very, very important to know and to talk about, to make sure you kind of know why this unit deals more damage to certain units and what units you should make if you're struggling against certain type of comps. If you're interested for more though, and just to see everything that I just mentioned visually, check out the full list of every unit type that will be in the description of this video to find out more. And that's pretty much it for the Gold to Grandmaster edition of this guide. Again, if you missed the previous one, the Bronze to Grandmaster video or the Silver to Grandmaster video, make sure to check them out. The next one we'll be releasing will obviously be Platinum to Grandmaster. We'll be talking about a couple of different things from we just talked about and kind of expand on everything I've talked about so far in a hope to help you guys learn and improve your StarCraft II gameplay. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you find it very, very helpful. Please let me know in the comments below if you did like it, and if you have any suggestions regarding this one or the future ones regarding the information I could be adding in these videos. Thank you guys so much for watching. I wish you to have a great day, and I'll see you guys tomorrow with yet another video. Bye bye.